Okay, don't expect no spoilers in this 10 best of, everyone. I'm just warning you up front. I have a 2022 best of video to film right now. All right, let's do this. Hi everyone, it's me, Jess, and Granola. Constantly wanting to knock over my tripod. I'm here with you during this festive season with my beautiful Christmas tree in the background to film my best books of 2022. And may I just say that this was not an easy task. It's never an easy task, but for some reason this year I found it to be especially difficult to choose books because I just read so many good books, and I was going through the list and I kept thinking, but can I have an honorable mention? Can this book be an honorable mention? And then I also had some books where I thought, well, should this really be in the top 10? Because I'm not sure if it should be in the top 10. Like, I really had a very tough time. I think it's always tough. And I don't know about the title of this video because I don't think it can be like my favorite books of 2022 because I read such a wide range of genres. Yes, so really struggling with this one to bring you a list, but because it's tradition, felt that I really should try to do that. So I'm not sure what order I'm doing this in. I guess I'm going to do it in kind of a random order. Am I going to do this in a random order? Maybe I should start, I think I'll start with the classics because I had some classics that I read this year that are in my top 10. It's very difficult when you combine classics with contemporary books because, yeah, it's just tough. Last year in 2021, I did a list of top 10 literary, like contemporary fiction books, literary fiction books, and classics, but I didn't read enough classics this year, and I thought, well, I could do a top 5. Anyway, complicated stuff, lots of detail into my process that you probably don't need to know. I'll start off with the classics. Do I want to do it that way? No, I don't. Maybe I'll do it for time of year. Let's do it for the time of year that I read the book. That seems like a really good way to do it. Yes. Okay, let's do it that way. So I'll start off with 2 books that I read, 3 books that I read at the beginning of the year that have stayed with me that, yeah, had to be on this list. The first one I don't have a physical copy of, but I knew when I read it there was absolutely no way that it would not be on my top 10 list for this year, and that is Kindred by Octavia Butler. I don't think there's many people who've read Kindred who don't have it on their top 10. It's just a great, great book. It's not to say that there aren't flaws with this book, but if there are, there aren't many. You could go back and watch my review, which I'll leave a card for and link in the description box. The story of a woman named Dana who is in an interracial marriage. It's set in the 70s, and it's a time travel story. So she travels through time. I think most people know the story of Kindred. She travels through time. She's pulled through time because she's called back in time to the time of the slave trade by a boy named Rufus who's a slave owner, and she is one of their slaves, and that he summons her because she's supposed to protect him. She goes back and forth between the modern day in the 70s and this plantation and this time. So she's obviously got a connection to this character Rufus. Well, not obviously at first, but it does become apparent that she has a connection to this character Rufus, and that becomes more and more apparent as she goes back and forth through time and what that connection is. And it's just an amazing book because it teaches you so much about what it was like to be a slave, but also tells this incredible story about this woman and her relationship to this man Rufus and to the other slaves on this plantation, and the relationship between her and her white husband, who also gets pulled back at one point. I don't want to reveal too much of the story. It's just fantastic. It's amazing. I've never read anything like it, and you have to read it if you haven't read it yet. And it was, I don't know why it took me so long to read it. And all of these books I will try not to gush too much about, but if you want to hear more about any of them, I've reviewed them all in my wrap-ups over the course of the year, except for I think one or two that were recent reads for me. So Kindred is the first on my list. It was just a fantastic book. And it wasn't annoying in any way. The way that the time travel worked was really well done. I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it without giving away too much of the plot. And the fact that it was written 1979 was its original publication date, which is, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to be doing a lot of that. I'm going to be doing a lot of the blah, 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 blah. It was amazing. No, I will try to be more articulate about what I loved about these books. I love the character of Dana. I loved the only thing about Kindred that I would have liked to have seen more of, and this is expecting a lot, is that I wanted to know more about, and I can't really even talk about it without giving too much of the book away, but I wanted to know more about the relationship between her and her husband. But anyway, as I said, I don't want to give too much of it away. Go read it. Let me know what you think. So that's the first one, is Kindred. And I have to read more books by Octavia Butler because I've heard that her other books are fantastic as well. So that's the first one on my list. And the first book I think I read in 2022. So that is saying a lot. The second book that I read and absolutely loved this year was Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson. And I'd heard so much praise for this book, and I just didn't really understand what all the praise was. People were gushing about it as well on BookTube and elsewhere. And I was like, okay, a book about, a black man living in London, and it's a love story, and okay, I don't really like love stories myself that much, or romance that much. And then I picked it, actually it was a gift. It was given to me for Christmas last year. Oh, my camera's doing that. I don't want to see that. Stop that. It was a gift for Christmas last year. It's narrated in the second person, so it really focuses on the perspective of the narrator. And at first it took me a little while to get used to this, but I actually really enjoyed that. It made it more intimate as a narration choice. I thought that would bother me, but it didn't bother me. I really loved this book. And I went back to look at my review to sort of see, well, what did I say about this book? And I didn't say much more than that, just that it was gorgeous and it was beautiful and all of those kinds of things that everybody else had been saying, that I was kind of like, okay, stop gushing. But it's true. You kind of have to read it to understand what makes it so beautiful. It's just a very kind of tender, romantic, but not in a cheesy way, look at a relationship from the perspective of a black man living in London. And she's a dancer and she lives in Dublin, and just about the way their relationship gets tested, I would say. Get it? Read it. You will love it. I'm going to say that about all these books. Okay, so that was the next one I read this year that I just thought was fantastic. This would make a really good gift, but actually gift giving season is over. But if you want to give a gift to someone this year, like for a birthday or something, this would make a really good gift. I never did end up doing the gift giving guide. I just didn't have time. I did find that this year I was a little short on time for filming things that I wanted to film. I've been thinking a lot about, well, anyway, I'm not going to talk about that in this video because this is I'm going to try to keep my videos a little more succinct. The next book that I want to talk about on my top 10, number 3, is Scarborough by Hernandez. This book was fantastic. It was subsequently made into a film, which I did watch on my flight to the UK or back from the UK. And I didn't like the film as much as the book. So there's that. But the book is fantastic. She writes about Scarborough, which is, you know, like a suburb or a borough of Toronto. And it's very multicultural, and she manages to capture the elements of that community that make it so. That makes sense. The thing about the community is that it's low income, and it's made up mostly of low income families and immigrant families. And she really manages to capture both the dignity of the community and the challenges that the families in those communities face as a result of the socioeconomic realities and the systems that are in place. And it is both very touching and very sad. So I think I described it as being heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. And I just thought it was so well done. I do talk about it in a lot more detail in the review, in the wrap-up that I did. And all of those will be included in the description box below. This was one of the 5 books on the Canada Reads competition. Anyway, yes, so Scarborough. The characters in this book are so wonderful and heartwarming and well developed and come off the page as true to life in a way that I think is kind of unusual, having read a lot of books. So I will say that, and I think that the depiction of the challenges that they face is very true to life. So yeah, I think it would be a difficult read, but I think it's a really good read. So I would recommend it. I recommend all the books on my list. So those were the 3 books from the early part of the year. So now we're going to be getting into kind of the summer books in my list. The next 2 books I read when I was away on summer vacation. Well, actually this next one I started and then lost and then found and then finished. So I'll talk about that one. And that would be My Policeman. I love this book so much. I know that I'm a little late to the party with it, but oh, it was so well written and just really, really enjoyed it. It tells the story of the policeman, my policeman character who is married to Marion, who is a school teacher and who is a character who may or may not be inspired by a policeman character who may have had an affair with E.M. Forrester character who is named as Patrick in this story, who is a museum curator in the story. And in the story, Patrick is put into jail for being homosexual. And the story is told through the relationship that Marion has with Tom, who is the My Policeman character, and also her relationship with Patrick later on in her life, in his life. And it's just a really well constructed story, and it really is at the end of the day about love and about betrayal. And it's just a really, really well written, well constructed, beautiful story. Again, I reviewed it and I read some excerpts from it, and I just think it's fantastic. And it's number 4 on my top 10 books of 2022 that I read in 2022. It's really, really, really good. A lot of love stories for someone who doesn't read romance. Well, 2 anyway, so far. Oh, and the next one's a love story too. The next book from the summer is Jane Austen's, this is my number 5, Jane Austen's Persuasion. I didn't get along very well with Jane Austen. When I first read Sense and Sensibility, I was kind of bored. I didn't really get it. And then I read Persuasion this summer, and I just loved the character. I just loved Anne Elliot's character so much that she got me. And I think it helps that I read Persuasion when I was in Nova Scotia, so reading about a captain when I was down by the ocean helped a lot, but mostly it was because I really fell in love with the character of Anne Elliot, this idea of second chance at love, and also this idea of a woman who, so Persuasion is about the story of Anne Elliot and her captain Wentworth, who they met and had feelings for each other, but the family decided that Captain Wentworth wasn't an appropriate match for her, and so she rejects him on the advice of family and family friends, and then he goes off, and she becomes sort of more and more isolated and doesn't and pines for him ultimately, and then they meet later on and eventually find one another again. That's kind of the crux of the story. I don't know what it was about this. There are some sections of this book that are still a little bit boring, I won't lie, but I think it's just the story itself and the character of Anne Elliot that really got me. And yeah, it was one of the best books I read this year. And I think I will read some more Jane Austen as a result. It's opened up, anything that would have opened up the door to more Jane Austen kind of has to be on this list for me. Number 6 on the list is Stephen King's The Body, which I also read this summer, which is also a classic that I was revisiting. I did read it a long time ago, and normally I wouldn't put a reread on a list like this, but I feel like I was like reading it for the first time, and I just can't ignore the fact that this was one of the best reading experiences I had this year, just because it was so, this novella was so good at writing male characters or boy characters, male characters, and being able to describe that soft masculinity in a way and at a time. I don't know, there was something about the way that these characters were written that really stayed with me. And I don't know if it's just nostalgic. Like, I do think a big part of it is nostalgic because when I watched Stand By Me, I was a young teenager, and that movie stayed with me. So I think there's definitely something about it personally for me that's very nostalgic, but it's just such a great piece of writing. It's such a perfect, and in a small amount of pages, I talked about this when I did my wrap up, it's just so well written, and I think it's one of the best pieces of writing I read this year. So that is number 6, Stephen King's The Body. If you don't know the story, it's a group of 4 boys who set off to find a missing boy's body. And it's about really their hopes and dreams, their lives, and their fears and their troubles and their friendship in a nutshell. And their adventure going off to find the body. And it's really great because it's a summer book. I had wanted to read it in the summer, and it's a summer book, and it's set in, you know, the hot heat of summer, which he captures really well as well. So that takes us through the summer and into the fall. The next book I don't have a physical copy of, but I read it with my book club, and this is on my top 10. It's a book, it's not a classic, and it's a book that I just discovered through my book club, and I just really fell in love with it. It's Little Foxes Took Up Matches. I think that's the title. Yeah, Little Foxes Took Up Matches. It's the only one on my list that's a 2022 book. Little Foxes Took Up Matches is a debut novel by Katja Kazbek, and it's set it's set in the 90s against the backdrop of the, just after the collapse of the Soviet Union, as it's beginning to rebuild itself. And it's about the story of Mitya, who it's a coming of age story, really, as well as it's about this boy who's trying to figure out his identity, and his sexuality. And it's also about the people around him in this country who are trying to understand, what they are and who they are coming out of this Soviet era society. So I don't know, it's fantastic. It has all the punk rock stuff. It has all the, it has all that kind of feeling of living on the streets and figuring out who you are and what family is and where you belong. And there's a lot of found family elements to the story. And ultimately, Mitya is figuring out that he's trans. So there's a lot of representation there as well. So it's just a fantastic book, and I think for a debut novel, I really loved it. There was only one thing that I didn't like about it, which was, well, not didn't like about it, but had a bit of a hard time with it, is that the story of Mitya is interwoven with a classic Russian folktale that I had a bit of a hard time with, that I had a bit of a hard time understanding, and that's the only thing that detracted from the story for me. But other than, I'm willing to overlook that and include it in my top 10 because I thought it was so good. And I really look forward to whatever she's going to write next. Like, I will absolutely read whatever she writes next. Because it does add, having the folktale did add a bit of surreality to it. Is that a word? I thought it was really well written. A queer coming of age story, you could say. Set in the backdrop of, Moscow in the 90s, where bands were playing punk rock music. That was pretty great. Number 8 is most definitely, well, I have 3 classics left, really. So Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which I'd never read, which is, like, again, I think one of maybe the best books I've ever read. I don't know. That's maybe saying a lot, but it's a classic. And so obviously including classics in your top 10 is always a bit strange because they're classics for a reason. I always say that. But Frankenstein was just a fantastic book. And it's like peeling back the layers of an onion, which is what I mentioned when I did my review of it. So if you want to go back again, you can check out the review. The story of Frankenstein is about a creature created by a scientist who takes on a life of his own. And basically, because this creature doesn't receive the love that he needs, he rebels and murders, or takes revenge, you could say. Then, yeah. Anyway, if you don't know the story of Frankenstein, read it, and then, or watch my review, and then it's a classic. What can I say? It's a classic. What is so amazing about the story of Frankenstein is that it's 3 stories. It's the story of the Arctic explorer. It's the story of our mad Victor Frankenstein, our mad professor, and it's the story of the monster, the unnamed monster. And it's a commentary on society and the things that we make that we don't take responsibility for. And it's a commentary on what happens when creatures are not nurtured and cared for. And I could go on, but this is my 10 best of, and I don't want this video to be insanely long, as they often are. But yeah, I don't see how Frankenstein could not have made it to my top 10, given that I read it this year. So that is coming in at number 8. I'm not ranking these, by the way. They're just in order of when I read them. Another classic that I read this year that I hadn't read any of this author's work before, and would be remiss if I didn't include her work in my top 10, is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I don't know what to say about Shirley Jackson other than what I said in my review, except that she is just very, very, very good at creating like suspense and creepiness in a way that you're not really sure what's going on. So it's a level of confusion that isn't so much about figuring out who's doing it or what's doing it. It's more just creating a sense of creepiness and nervousness and anxiety. And that's the best way that I can describe it to you without, reading it to you. In this particular story, The Haunting of Hill House, the house itself contributes as a character, and I think that that's really cool, and I think that's very original. I think what I would say about Shirley Jackson's writing, and this is the only thing that I've read of her so far, is that she's very, very original and very creative in the way that she's able to do that. Again, I would recommend that you go back and watch my review, or watch my video where I review this book. But I had never read any Shirley Jackson before, and she's very unique. I hadn't read anything like this before, and I think that she's very unique in the way that she's able to create that anxiety. In particular, she's very creative, at least in this story, in the way that she created this character and the way that she focuses on one of the characters in the book. The story is about this this researcher who's doing an experiment on a house that's supposed to be haunted, and he's invited 4 people to come to the house to do an experiment to see if the house is in fact haunted. And then she focuses on one of the people who's been invited, a woman, and she focuses on her history. And so it's just a really interesting way to create suspense and to create anxiety in the reader. But anyway, I actually did a vlog when I read this, so you can watch either the review or the vlog to get a sense of what the reading experience was like. But that's all I'll say about it for now. I really want to read more Shirley Jackson. She's incredible. What an incredible writer. And very, very unique. It's not often that I've read something where I've felt that much physical anxiety while I'm reading the book. So, yes, definitely in my top 10. And then the last one I just finished reading over the holidays, and it should not come as any surprise that it's in my top 10. It's a classic as well. It's Daphne du Maurier, My Cousin Rachel. And I don't know, I should go back and look. I've only been doing this this is the second year that I've done a top 10, and last year I'm pretty sure I had Daphne du Maurier in my top 10. My Cousin Rachel, what a great book. I haven't wrapped up December yet because I'm still hoping that I might finish a book for December. So I haven't done a December wrap up yet, but the one that I'm reading, I'm pretty sure won't be in my top 10 for the year. But My Cousin Rachel was so good. It is another really good book that creates suspense and tension. It's the story of a man's cousin named Rachel, who is Italian, and she is married to, well, I don't know how that would work. Anyway, she's married to this man's cousin. Anyway, cousin, first cousin, second cousin, how these work. His cousin Ambrose, uncle, cousin. Anyway, so she marries Ambrose. Ambrose dies, and she's not named in Ambrose's will. But she manages to, through a series of different pressures by society and by her behavior, find her way into the good graces of the cousin. And his name is Philip. And it's really about the dynamic between Rachel and Philip. Philip is only 24. He only comes into his inheritance from Ambrose when he turns 25. And it's all about what happens between Rachel and Philip before Philip turns 25. And oh my goodness. Oh, it's so good. So I won't tell you how it all turns out, but it's Daphne du Maurier at her best, and she is so good. So yes, this had to go into my top 10. So that's it, everyone. Those are my top 10 books of the year. I read so many other great books this year, and I really would have liked to have talked about others, but I've talked about them throughout the year. You can check out all of my wrap-ups for the various different months if you want to see those that I liked the most. I will try to go back over onto my Goodreads and give 5-star ratings and 4-star ratings to the ones that I liked most this year, so you can see them over on my Goodreads. That will be linked in the description box below. And I'll be coming back on with a few more videos. I'm going to do a goals video and a few other things. I just filmed a wrap my TBR. And I'm going to try to keep up with the videos in 2023, but we'll see how it goes. Love you guys. Thank you so much for supporting me this year in 2022. I've had so much fun with BookTube, and I'm really looking forward to 2023. Bye for now. Bye! Look at all these beauties. Look at all these beautiful books. Bye! No spoil, well, sort of spoilery. Sorry. I should have said that first. Sorry. Don't expect no spoilers in this temp. I always lose my words when I'm filming.